international business. All right, party is over. We still got 30 minutes, and I got two topics. 12.4, competitive environment. That's page 460. Uh-oh. And the section says cost. Come on, girls. Hello. Yeah, enough.
Sorry.
Cost pressures. Cost pressures and pressures for local responsiveness. Pressures for local responsiveness. Okay, so these are in general known as, the section is called cost pressures and pressures for local responsiveness. These are generically known as competitive environment, or I can change it, so, well, I can change it like this, competitive pressures. And the fundamental idea here is amazingly simple. The competitive pressures will determine the strategy. In other words, business strategy is driven by the competitive pressures of cost pressures and of pressures for local responsiveness. Okay. Cost pressures is, do you really have to keep up with costs? Example of cost pressures where cost is extremely important will be, now back to cost. Pressures will be, for example, for commodities. I mean, copper is copper. Kilogram of copper is a kilogram of copper, okay? Natural gas is pretty much natural gas. True, oil has different grades of variations of acidity and other properties, but basically a barrel of oil is a barrel of oil. When you're selling rice, price is very important. So, for commodities where one product can easily substitute for another product, you would expect significant significant cost pressures. Examples where cost pressures aren't very important will be the luxury segment for cars. Yes, you have between BMWs and Mercedes cost pressures, but not in the ultra luxury car segment known as exotic cars. Ferrari, Lamborghini, okay? For these, you don't get significant cost pressures as you would get in Volkswagen and Toyota. So, on the very low level, you get significant cost pressures. So, it depends on the type of market that you're operating. Cost pressures are not very high for the high-end mobiles. For example, iPhones could charge a little bit or a lot more. Let's say there's some Galaxies, and you're still going to have certain customers who will choose the iPhone in general. So the question is, to what extent you can substitute one car for another. Yeah, some people could be fans of Toyota, but a Volkswagen is a fairly good substitute for a Toyota, and vice versa. Same thing with different rices. So these are some of the cost pressures. And cost pressures are important for realizing, let's use this economies of scale. Or the opposite is what I have in mind. If you have cost pressures, you have to realize economies of scale in order to compete. Economies of scale lower cost, and if you have a cost pressure, you have to somehow enjoy economies of scale. Economies of scale are becoming very important. And if you have cost pressures, of paramount importance is to extract the so-called location economies, which I discussed last time. You move production to where production will be relatively low cost. So, if you have cost pressures, you better have these two in place, otherwise you're going to get yourself in trouble. Okay? Otherwise, you're not going to be competitive. So, these cost pressures are commodities and so-called commodity type goods. These are all goods that are like commodity. Commodity type good will be, for some of you, wow, interesting. I'm looking at your bottles, the bottle of water that you have and your bottle. You most use the same brand because that's the brand you're having over here. But this is a commodity type good. 1 liter of this water is pretty much the same as 1 liter of that water, as long as you perceive the water to be relatively clean and not damaging to your health, right? I mean, whether it's this liter or that liter, whether it's this brand or that brand, in other words, the market for water has significant cost pressures because it's a commodity type good. I mean, a liter of water is just a little of water, and you're going to get that thing. Now, commodity type good today, and I was explaining in a previous lecture, but not 10 or 15 years ago, will be with laptops at the very low end, and that's important. You're having fun, right? Okay. Laptops, and here's the trick, at the very low end. The cheap laptops would be a commodity type good. You wouldn't be looking into hours of battery or screen resolution or the little details. You just want a computer who's up and running. For example, when Filipinos or some other relatively poor people, they just buy any kind of laptop just to have something running, okay? Now, on the high end, now is a whole different story. There in no way. Some people love their brand. Some people say most important thing, we spoke with the guy was, oh, my battery runs 8 hours, he told me, right? Some people say, oh, the most important thing is screen resolution and quality of screen. Some people swear by getting a MacBook because the Mac was having a fantastic screen with a top quality, okay? Some people are swearing by the ultra thin and skinny Samsung laptops. So, when you move to the more expensive stuff, it is not any more commodity type, and different things would matter. Some will be choosing because of the battery, others will be choosing, I remember back in the old days, before laptops were a commodity, Sony had the best design laptops. And having a Sony laptop was a big thing. Oh, also desktop, they were a lot smaller and all the other things. So back in the old days, Sony was a very well designed. Well, today, at the low end, laptop is just a commodity type. Well, same thing you see here, I guess. You actually use here in Thailand, a little scooter, 100cc or 125cc scooter is definitely a commodity type good. I mean, they just substitute, and whether it's a Yamaha or Suzuki or Honda, a 100cc scooter is pretty much the same thing. There is no much difference. Now, once you get into the higher end bikes, then it's no longer commodity type. You don't have the pressures over there. But for the scooters, the basic scooters, you have huge cost pressures. Let's see what else. Well, that's it. 2, local responsiveness. So this is the first big section, subsection. Second big subsection is local responsiveness. So, what determines local responsiveness? The most common one is history. For historical reasons, whatever that might be, things got the way they are, and you gotta comply with the market. Here's a silly thing, which you all know and are perfectly familiar with, volts and voltage. You gotta run with whatever the voltage is, whether it's 110 as it is in the United States or 220 in some other countries like in Europe. Right? Now in Saudi Arabia, I was there, a lot of times, you know, they will have on the wall itself sometimes 110 and sometimes running 220. And you can get the wrong appliance to the wrong plug, the appliance will blow up on you, okay? So you gotta be careful what the voltage is. Or if you're selling in a country where the voltage is only 220, you can't sell a 110 volt appliance when, you know, you're running on 220. It's just not gonna work, or it's gonna blow up on you, okay? So you have to have, no matter what, to adapt, in this case, the voltage. Now, other silly things like you guys are facing here, plugs, electric plugs, right? I mean, you got different types of plugs, double plug with this, or a triple plug, okay? I mean, plugs are simple things. Now, if you're selling whatever the product is, you gotta have a plug that fits within the country. You can't try and sell European plug over here in this. I mean, European plugs don't fit on many of the sockets in here. So these are some of the simple and easy things. I mean, these are easy to figure out, but that's not what's really important. Yeah, here's another one which you guys are, I presume, noticing and observing. Left-hand side driving. People here drive on the wrong side of the road, right? In Europe, you drive on the right one. Here, they drive on the opposite one, right? They call it the left side, you call it the, no, the wrong side. So, you can't, huh? Well, that's the opposite of right. The opposite of right is, right? Just play, you know, they say, oh, everybody's driving on the wrong side. because in the United States, you're either on the right side, the other way, they say wrong way. In American English, if you're driving on the other side, it's called the wrong side. That's American English, all right? What they mean, the left side. So, Left-hand side, well, you can't. It's very difficult to say to sell a car with a left wheel in a left-hand side driving. It's just not gonna sell. I mean, you can try selling BMWs European style, they're not gonna be selling. They're not gonna be, you gotta move the wheel to the proper side. You gotta adjust the wheel, you gotta adjust all the things, So, same thing with British cars and German cars, right? I mean, when German automakers sell to UK, they sell it with the appropriate side, okay? So these are the simple and easy things which you gotta deal with. So, history is one of them. Next one is consumer tastes. Consumer taste. I mean, corn doesn't sell here. I mean, it sells, but not a whole lot, okay? Here, sells rice. Now, back in my home country, people will eat from time to time rice, but rice is no big deal, okay? But consumers have their own tastes, and they will have their own preferences. They just like what they like, okay? You got consumer tastes, you got consumer preferences. All right. History. Now, part of history is, I already explained and gave you a number of examples, infrastructure. Infrastructure. I gave you the example with the voltage. I gave you an example of infrastructure with the plugs. I gave you an example with the left-hand side driving. Another type of infrastructure is mobiles. Mobiles, they work with different megahertz, okay? And it could not just get a Nokia from the US and run it in Europe. It wouldn't run. But at the same token, you can't just get a mobile, European mobile, and run it in the US. Until later on, mobile makers designed such phones that will be running on multiple frequencies. So now there's no problem getting my mobile and run it in Japan, run it in Macau. I did. Runs fine. Runs in Hong Kong. Runs here. It sure runs back home in Bulgaria. Okay, and you won't have a problem running in the U.S. But back in the old days, with different frequencies, that was serious problem. You can't just sell a European Nokia on the US market or a US Nokia on the European market. It simply wouldn't work, okay, as many people discovered. Part of infrastructure also will include different types of TV systems. You couldn't get an American TV for the American system, which has got the different proportions and ratios, I don't want to get into that, and run it in Europe. And by the same token, you couldn't get a European TV to run it in the US. It just won't run. And it's not simply the plug, it's not simply the voltage. It's a different type of TV signal system and all the other things. So infrastructure is extremely important and a lot of times determining the products. You have to adjust if the infrastructure is different. There is no other way, as the case with cars. You have to adjust. You have no choice. And the other one, which is part of history, is traditional practices. Practices. Traditional practices, they give here example will be cooking stoves. Well, some people like it in some countries to cook one way, other people like another way. Some like it strong, some like it weak, some like it this, some like it that, some like it with different types of pots, different types of pans. Okay, they will fit differently on a stove. I'm not exactly an expert, but I can see with my own eyes that here, and you can see too, in Thailand, people cook so differently and use the cooking, both utensils and the furnace and all the other things, used in a very, very different way than we use them in Europe. And if you can get a simple, straight European stove that will sell easily in Germany, it might not sell at all here because people aren't going to use the stove here the same way that Germans do in Germany, okay, for whatever reasons. Maybe just cultural, maybe just the kitchen is different, maybe the products are different, maybe the cooking style is different, whatever reasons, the tradition, they will have different practices, so you can't possibly rely or expect that Thais will use the oven in the same way that Germans would in Germany, okay? So, a lot of traditional practices. Number 3, a lot will actually depend in on the distribution channel. How the product is advertised, how the product is marketed, but more important, who's going to sell it? In the textbook, they give you example with different types of distributions for drugs, as in medicine, as in pharmaceuticals. Pharmaceuticals are very differently distributed in Europe from here, Asia, especially in Japan. You also have different regulatory system, and a different regulation will mean a different distribution system, different wholesale type of system, different retail type system, different maybe required prescription, not required prescription, maybe different packaging, maybe different labeling. A whole bunch of things will depend on distribution. So, no matter what the product is, you need to understand if there is a market, what is the standard distribution channel in that particular country, okay? Next one is host government demands. The local government will usually have a demand. Of course, sometimes it's going to be a pure racket. They just want to get a bribe. Sometimes they'll just want to please their constituency, the voters. But sometimes the government will simply try to do the right thing. And they say, oh, you guys want to do this? Okay, but you're going to do it our way. Or you will also have to add this, or you also have to add that. So the government made different demands, and of course, the most common one is different regulations. Yeah, sure, you can sell the meat, but you will have to go through this and this test also, okay? Oh yes, you can sell this product, but you have to label it, whether, I don't know, the baby milk formula, whether it's got this and this component or that and that. In other words, what is the type of sweetener? Is it artificial sweetener, or is it natural sweetener, or the type, whatever, the so-called yeast, different types of yeast. So you will also be facing a number of regulations. All right, and that's pretty much it. Let's see, time. All right, I will only begin and just summarize, and next time we'll go into detail. Section 12.5, I'll just begin, spend hopefully about 5 minutes. I will in no way complete it because it's kind of like the most important. So I'll give you introduction to strategy. So 12, I'll write it here, 12.5. Choosing strategy. Page 463. All right, let me see now what we got. Okay, what we got is the following chart over here. I'm just going to introduce it for 5 minutes without ever going in, without today going into the details. It's going to be next time. Over here, cost pressures. So on this one, you're going to have a cost pressure. And we're going to create a box with low cost pressure and high. Let's make sure I got it right. Yes. And so low and high cost pressure. And over here is local responsiveness. So, what I was doing so far, fun time? Yeah, five more minutes, hopefully less than 5. So, what section 4 did was the following. We said the competitive pressures, in other words, cost pressures, could be very high or they could be very low. And by the same token, the pressure for local responsiveness could be, let's make sure I got this one right. So, could be low, or it could be high. And as I explained at the very beginning of the previous lecture, the cost pressures and the pressures for local responsiveness will determine the strategy. So, what is the strategy? The strategy for, if you have, let's say, high cost pressures and high responsiveness, you gotta use, I'll use red here, transnational. Transnational strategy. Now, when the pressure is low for both costs, you use international. Strategy. So here it's transnational strategy, here it's international strategy. If you have high local responsiveness, but you don't have cost pressures, but you gotta fit the market, it's called localization strategy. In other words, you will spend the extra money and the extra cost because the cost pressure is low. You can spend the money to localize the product. Let me repeat, localization is you adjust the product so as to fit the local market, whatever the local market's needs might be. Okay? Example that I gave you of localization at the very, very beginning of this course, that will be almost 2 months ago, was, for example, Levi's jeans. They are meant to be tight and sexy, but not in the Arab world. In the Arab world, that's not acceptable. There, you need to have a different type, loose fit and whatever that might be, that will fit more the acceptability in Muslim culture. You have to adjust those jeans. Those jeans simply won't sell. So you have to localize them, all right? And the last strategy over here is called global standardization. Global standardization strategy and localization strategy. These four we call strategic posture. Strategic posture. So basically, the cost pressures and responsiveness will determine your strategic posture, which is a better, a more precise way of saying strategy, okay? Because the strategy, it might not be just cut and dry. It's not like it's low, meaning 0, and high, meaning 1. It's not a 0-1 choice. And here, it's not a 0-high choice. It's a spectrum, okay? So the higher the requirement for responsiveness, the stronger will be the posture, okay? So these four postures is what I'll get into detail and discuss next time, because this represents the heart of the course. And from this, a lot of things will follow for the rest of the course. And a lot of what we did so far was to build up to this point over here. All right, good enough? Okay.